$2.4 billion. That is the amount Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund transferred to a private equity firm owned by Jared Kushner 6 months after his father-in-law left the White House. $2.4 billion to a man with zero investment management experience, zero track record in private equity, and a security clearance that had been denied by career intelligence professionals 40 times before being overruled by presidential order. $2.4 billion while American teachers worked second jobs to afford classroom supplies and veterans died waiting for healthcare appointments. Jasmine Crockett had been waiting 18 months for this moment. She had requested this hearing 3 times. She had been told twice that scheduling conflicts made it impossible. She had been told once that the matter was not within the committee's jurisdiction. But on this Tuesday morning in March, Jared Kushner finally sat before the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, his legal team flanking him on both sides, his expression carrying the particular combination of boredom and contempt that had defined every previous congressional appearance. By the time this hearing ended, that expression would be gone. One sentence would haunt him for the rest of his political life, but that came later. For now, he owned the room. The hearing began exactly as Kushner's team had planned. The chairman opened with procedural remarks. Kushner's attorney made a brief statement establishing that his client appeared voluntarily as a private citizen, no longer serving in any government capacity, and therefore not subject to certain oversight protocols. Kushner himself sat motionless, his hands folded on the table before him, his face betraying nothing. When the first Republican committee member yielded his time to allow Kushner an opening statement, Kushner leaned forward with the ease of someone who had delivered this performance many times before. He thanked the committee for the opportunity to set the record straight. He acknowledged that his business dealings had been the subject of intense media scrutiny and what he called partisan speculation. He understood that some people found the timing suspicious. He respected their right to question, but he wanted to be absolutely clear about the facts. His private equity firm had been established with complete independence from any government influence. Every investor underwent rigorous legal and ethical review. The Saudi Public Investment Fund had conducted its own extensive due diligence, spanning 14 months before making any commitment. Their investment decision was based entirely on the strength of his firm's strategic vision, his team's credentials, and the projected returns in targeted sectors, including technology infrastructure and sustainable development. He had never leveraged government relationships for personal gain. He had never promised access. He had never delivered favors. His firm operated under the same regulatory framework as every other private equity fund in the United States. The insinuation that something improper had occurred was not just factually wrong, it was insulting to the professional investors who had trusted him with their capital. He spoke for 7 minutes without interruption. His voice never rose, his hands never moved. When he finished, he took a slow sip of water and settled back into his chair with the posture of someone who had just completed an unpleasant but necessary formality. Several Republican members nodded. The chairman thanked him for his candor. The room felt settled. This would be another hearing that produced no meaningful revelation, another afternoon of partisan theater that would be forgotten by the evening news cycle. Kushner's lead attorney leaned toward him and whispered something brief. Kushner's mouth moved fractionally in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Jasmine Crockett had not moved during the entire opening statement. She sat 3 seats from the chairman's right, a yellow legal pad before her, a pen in her hand, her expression neutral. She had taken no notes. She had not looked at her phone. She had not conferred with her staff. She had simply watched Kushner speak, her gaze steady and unblinking, her posture utterly still. When her turn came and the chairman recognized the gentlewoman from Texas, she did not immediately begin. She let 2 full seconds pass. Then she thanked the chairman and turned her attention fully to Kushner. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet enough that the microphone barely caught it. She appreciated Mr. Kushner taking time from his schedule to appear today. She understood he was a busy man with significant professional responsibilities. She wanted to start with something simple to establish a baseline. According to his opening statement, his firm had been established with complete independence from government influence. She just wanted to confirm one detail for the record. The firm had been incorporated on January 27, 2021. Was that accurate? Kushner glanced at his attorney, who nodded fractionally. Kushner confirmed the date, January 27, 2021. Crockett thanked him. So 6 days after his father-in-law left office, 6 days after his own security clearance expired, 6 days after his West Wing office was vacated, she was just establishing the timeline. Nothing controversial there. He had moved quickly to begin his next chapter. That made perfect sense for someone with his ambition and connections. She appreciated the confirmation. Something in the room's energy shifted. Kushner's attorney leaned forward slightly. Kushner himself remained motionless, but his eyes had narrowed by a degree not visible to anyone not watching closely. Crockett reached beneath the table and lifted a 3-ring binder onto the surface before her. The binder was black, approximately 3 inches thick, with tabbed dividers visible along the right edge. She opened it with the reverence of a scholar handling ancient texts, turning to a page marked with a red tab, her finger moving down the text until she found what she was looking for. She had a document she wanted to share with Mr. Kushner and with the committee. This was a cable from the United States Embassy in Riyadh, dated March 15, 2020. It had been declassified pursuant to a FOIA request filed 11 months ago and released to her office 6 weeks ago. The cable documented a meeting between then senior advisor Jared Kushner and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The meeting had not appeared on any public schedule. The cable noted that Mr. Kushner had traveled without standard State Department support staff and that the embassy had been informed of the visit 17 hours before arrival. She wanted to read one sentence from the cable directly into the record. Quote, Senior Advisor Kushner discussed with the Crown Prince potential private sector opportunities that would become available to Senior Advisor Kushner following the conclusion of his government service. End quote. She looked up from the document. Did Mr. Kushner recall this meeting? The silence that followed was not total, but it was profound. Typing in the press gallery stopped. Phones that had been discreetly checked under tables were lowered. Kushner's attorney placed his hand on Kushner's forearm, but Kushner had already begun to respond. He recalled a trip to Saudi Arabia in March 2020. He had taken many such trips during his tenure in government. The characterization in that cable was incomplete and lacked important context. He had discussed many topics with many foreign leaders. His conversations were always in service of American strategic interests. Crockett thanked him for that clarification. She appreciated context. She wanted to provide some additional context herself. She turned several pages in the binder. She had another document. This one was from April 2020, another declassified cable, another meeting with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. This time, the cable noted that Senior Advisor Kushner had provided the Crown Prince with a preliminary overview of sectors where he anticipated building investment expertise. The cable listed 4 sectors: technology infrastructure, sustainable energy, regional telecommunications, and defense logistics. She looked up. She wanted Mr. Kushner to know that she had checked his firm's current investment portfolio. Those 4 sectors represented 92% of his fund's stated focus areas. Was that a coincidence? Kushner's face had changed color slightly, not dramatically, just the faint deepening of tone that suggested elevated blood pressure. His voice, when he responded, remained level, but something in its quality had altered. Many people in private equity focused on those sectors. They represented the future of global commerce. His firm's focus was entirely consistent with the industry trends. Crockett nodded slowly. Industry trends. That was helpful. She appreciated him raising that point because it gave her an opportunity to share some additional information with the committee. She turned to a new tab in the binder. This one was blue. She had obtained records from the Office of Government Ethics regarding financial disclosures filed by senior White House staff during the previous administration. Mr. Kushner's final financial disclosure, filed in January 2021, listed his net worth at approximately $200 million. That disclosure covered assets, investments, and business interests. It did not list any ownership interest in a private equity fund because at that time, no such fund existed. What happened next was remarkable. Within 6 months of leaving government, Mr. Kushner had secured $2.4 billion in committed capital. The single largest commitment was $2 billion from Saudi Arabia's public investment fund. She wanted the committee to understand the scale of what that represented. Mr. Kushner had gone from government employee to manager of a fund larger than the GDP of 70 nations in less than 200 days. She was not questioning his talent. She was questioning the timeline. How did someone with zero private equity track record secure the largest single investor commitment in the history of Middle Eastern sovereign wealth deployment in American markets? Kushner's attorney leaned toward the microphone. He wanted to object to the characterization. His client's background included extensive real estate development experience, international business negotiations, and direct relationships with major financial institutions established over decades. The suggestion that he lacked qualifications was factually incorrect and frankly offensive. Crockett did not look at the attorney. Her eyes remained fixed on Kushner. She appreciated the attorney's input, but her question had been directed to Mr. Kushner himself. How had he secured $2 billion from Saudi Arabia in under 200 days? Kushner took a breath that was visible enough to register on camera. He had not secured anything in 200 days. The negotiation process with PIF had taken 14 months, as he had stated in his opening remarks. The commitment had been made in April 2021, but the discussions had begun far earlier. Crockett thanked him for that correction. So the discussions had begun while he was still in government. That was actually very helpful because it confirmed what she had suspected. She reached for a second binder that had been resting on the floor beside her chair. This binder was larger, perhaps 5 inches thick, and it landed on the table with a sound heavy enough to carry through the microphone. She did not open it immediately. She simply rested her hand on its cover and looked at Kushner with an expression that contained no triumph, no anger, nothing but a kind of infinite patience. She wanted to walk the committee through something important, something that went beyond Mr. Kushner's personal business dealings and spoke to a larger pattern. During his 4 years in government, Mr. Kushner had been denied a permanent security clearance 40 times. 40 separate times, career intelligence professionals had recommended against granting him access to the nation's most sensitive secrets. Those recommendations had been overruled. Mr. Kushner had received his clearance by direct intervention. The concerns raised by intelligence professionals had included foreign contacts, financial vulnerabilities, and potential leverage points. Those concerns had been documented, those concerns had been specific, and according to those intelligence assessments, the single greatest vulnerability area for Mr. Kushner was financial exposure to Middle Eastern governments and specifically to Saudi Arabia. She paused. She let that sentence settle over the room like snow. Then she opened the second binder. Inside were not documents, but photographs. The first photograph showed Kushner and Mohammed bin Salman seated together in what appeared to be an ornate reception room. The second showed them walking side by side through a corridor. The third showed them at a formal dinner. She turned the pages slowly, each image appearing and then disappearing as she moved to the next. She did not narrate them. She simply turned pages. 12 photographs in total. 12 documented meetings between March 2019 and December 2020. Meetings in Riyadh, in Davos, in New York, in Washington. Meetings that appeared on no public schedules. Meetings that generated cables now sitting in classified databases, accessible only to those with proper clearance levels or to congressional oversight committees exercising their constitutional authority. She looked up. She wanted Mr. Kushner to understand something. She was not suggesting anything illegal had occurred. She was not accusing him of violating any statute. What she was documenting was something more fundamental. A senior government official with access to the nation's most sensitive intelligence repeatedly denied security clearance by professionals trained to assess risk, had engaged in extensive private contact with a foreign government. That same foreign government had then transferred $2 billion to that official's private investment fund within months of his departure from public service. The intelligence professionals who had warned about exactly this vulnerability had been overruled. Their warnings had been ignored, and everything they had feared had come to pass exactly as they had predicted. The room had gone absolutely silent. No typing, no coughing, no shuffling of papers. Kushner's hand had moved to his water glass but stopped before reaching it. His attorney had opened his mouth to speak but produced no sound. 10 seconds. 15. 20. Someone in the press gallery dropped a pen, and the sound was startling enough that several heads turned. Crockett reached for a third folder, this one thinner, manila-colored, resting beneath the second binder. She opened it and removed a single sheet of paper. She held it up so the cameras could see it clearly, though the text was too small to read at that distance. This was a memo from the Saudi Public Investment Fund's Internal Advisory Board dated September 2020. The memo had been leaked to the New York Times and published 4 months ago, but had received limited attention because it had been buried in a larger story about sovereign wealth fund governance. She was going to read 3 sentences from that memo. Quote, "The proposed investment in Kushner's fund does not meet our standard return threshold requirements. Independent analysis suggests significant risk factors, including lack of demonstrated performance history and overexposure to political perception challenges. However, strategic relationship value and future access considerations justify proceeding despite financial risk assessment concerns." End quote. She lowered the paper. She looked directly at Kushner. The Saudis' own investment professionals had recommended against funding his firm. They had been overruled, not because of his qualifications, not because of projected returns, because of strategic relationship value and future access considerations. Kushner's voice when it came was tight enough that the words seemed to require physical effort. That memo was taken out of context. Investment committees debate risk factors in every major commitment. The final decision had been based on comprehensive analysis. Crockett nodded. Comprehensive analysis. She appreciated that phrase because it gave her an opportunity to share one more document. She pulled from the manila folder a second sheet. This was a table comparing the performance of Kushner's fund against industry benchmarks for the 18 months since its inception. The data came from financial disclosures required by SEC regulations. Mr. Kushner's fund had returned negative 4.2%. The industry average for comparable funds in the same period was positive 11.7%. Saudi Arabia had invested $2 billion in a fund that was underperforming the market by nearly 16 percentage points. She paused. She wanted the committee to sit with that number, 16 percentage points below market average. On a $2 billion investment, that represented a theoretical opportunity cost of approximately $320 million. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was losing money on paper because they had chosen to invest in a fund run by someone with no track record over thousands of professionally managed alternatives that would have delivered standard market returns. She turned to a new page in the folder, but there was more. Mr. Kushner's fund charged what was known in the industry as a 2 and 20 structure, 2% annual management fee and 20% of profits. On $2 billion, the 2% management fee alone was $40 million per year. $40 million whether the fund made money or lost money, whether it beat the market or fell behind. $40 million annually paid directly to Mr. Kushner's firm for management services. Over the 5-year commitment period standard in such agreements, that was $200 million in guaranteed management fees, regardless of performance. The Saudis were paying $200 million in fees to someone whose fund was losing them money. She looked up. Unless the point was never about making money, unless the $200 million was the payment, and the investment structure was simply the delivery mechanism that made it legal. Kushner's attorney slammed his palm on the table hard enough that the microphones registered a thud. He wanted to object in the strongest possible terms. This was pure speculation. This was conspiracy theory dressed up as oversight. His client had broken no laws, violated no regulations, and disclosed every required filing. This hearing had become a partisan attack based on innuendo and selective interpretation of out-of-context documents. Crockett waited for the attorney to finish. Then she spoke in a voice that had somehow become even quieter than before. She appreciated the attorney's passion, but she wanted to clarify something. She had not accused Mr. Kushner of breaking any law. She had simply presented documents, embassy cables, investment memos, performance data, SEC filings. Every single piece of information she had shared this morning was part of the public record, or had been obtained through proper congressional oversight channels. She had not speculated. She had not theorized. She had simply asked Mr. Kushner to explain how the documented facts fit together in a way that made sense to the American people. She closed the folder. She turned to face Kushner directly. She wanted to give him an opportunity right now, on the record, to provide that explanation. He had said in his opening statement that the Saudi investment was based on his firm's strategic vision, his team's credentials, and projected returns. But his own investors' internal memos said the investment failed to meet return thresholds. He had said he never leveraged government relationships for personal gain. But he had discussed his post-government business plans with foreign leaders while still holding a security clearance. He had said the timing was not suspicious. But he had incorporated his firm 6 days after leaving office and secured $2 billion from a government he had met with privately at least 12 times while serving as a senior advisor to the President of the United States. She paused. Her next words came slowly, each one separated by a beat of silence. Would he like to revise his opening statement? The silence that followed was total. 23 seconds. The committee chairman shifted in his seat. A camera operator in the rear of the room adjusted position, and the mechanical click was audible. Kushner's jaw worked as though he were attempting to form words, but his throat was not cooperating. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. Kushner shook his head fractionally. His eyes had not left Crockett's face, but something in them had changed. The boredom was gone. The contempt was gone. What remained was something closer to fear. Finally, Kushner spoke. His voice was hoarse. He stood by his original statement. He had operated within all legal guidelines. He had nothing to revise. Crockett nodded slowly. She thanked him for his answer. She wanted the record to reflect that Mr. Kushner had been given the opportunity to provide additional context and had declined. She had no further questions at this time, but she was submitting for the record all documents referenced in today's hearing, including the embassy cables, the Saudi investment memos, the performance comparisons, and a complete timeline of meetings between Mr. Kushner and Saudi officials during his government service. She was also requesting that the committee issue a formal subpoena for all communications between Mr. Kushner and representatives of the Saudi government from January 2019 through December 2021. The American people deserved a complete accounting, but before she yielded her time, she wanted to share one more thing. It was not a document. It was a story. 3 months ago, her office had been contacted by a woman named Patricia Dennison from Scottsdale, Arizona. Mrs. Dennison was 72 years old. Her husband, Tom, had served in the Army for 23 years, including 2 tours in Iraq. Tom had been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer 18 months ago. The VA had approved his treatment, but funding delays meant he had been waiting 9 months for a specialized therapy his doctors said might extend his life. 9 months waiting for the government to process payment for medicine that cost $47,000. Tom Dennison died on January 8th, waiting for treatment the VA had promised but never funded. $47,000. That was what Tom Dennison's life was worth to the system designed to serve him. $47,000 that never arrived in time. Crockett's voice had not risen, but something in its quality had changed. There was no performance in it now, only exhaustion. She wanted Mr. Kushner to understand what $47,000 represented as a fraction of the $40 million he received annually in management fees from Saudi Arabia. It was 0.117%. Tom Dennison's entire treatment cost was roughly 1/10 of 1% of Mr. Kushner's annual fees from a single investor. One investor, 1 year, 1/10 of 1% would have saved Tom Dennison's life. Instead, that money and billions more flowed to someone who had spent 4 years in government service with access to classified intelligence about the very nation that would later make him extraordinarily wealthy. She paused. She looked at Kushner with an expression that held no anger, only a bottomless weariness. She wanted to know if he saw the math, if he understood what the numbers meant in human terms, if somewhere in his strategic vision and projected returns he had space to consider the cost of the system he represented. Kushner said nothing. His face had gone pale. His hands rested on the table before him, but they were trembling faintly. Crockett yielded her time. The chairman called a 15-minute recess. Kushner stood immediately. His legal team surrounded him, and they moved toward the exit in a tight formation. Cameras tracked their movement, but Kushner's face was no longer visible behind the wall of attorneys. They left through the rear door and did not return when the hearing reconvened 20 minutes later. The chairman read a statement from Kushner's legal counsel indicating that his client had fulfilled his voluntary commitment to appear and answer questions and would not be participating in further proceedings at this time. The remainder of the hearing continued without him. The empty chair where he had sat remained positioned before the committee table, a microphone still active, a nameplate still visible, the space somehow more powerful than his presence had been.